connect with Adrian Mowat, who is an EM equity strategist, to understand actually where India lies when you talk about the entire scheme of arrangement in this entire world. Or we've seen a shift of flows coming in from India to China and to the United States. But now, are we likely to see that move back into India? Let's bring on board Adrian Mowat. A very good morning to you, Adrian. Thank you so much for joining us on ET Now. And the biggest question being is that do you sense or do you think that the US market is now topping out, given the fact that the economic outlook is not that great?
Yes, I do. And I think there's very good evidence of that, particularly in the Mag 7. Perhaps financials have got a bit more resilience in the US. But if we think about the US story, we've got an expensive market. Much of the last 24 months has been talking about US exceptionalism, US economy growing much faster than the rest of the OECD and many EMs. The policy that the current administration's put in place is going to be damaging for growth. And I think the evidence of that is coming through in both consumer and corporate sentiment. I particularly note how small businesses confidence has fallen sharply. Tariffs will slow growth, drive up inflation, which then traps the Federal Reserve in not being able to cut rates as the economy slows. I think we've also got a story around the dollar. The dollar has been extremely strong in the last couple of years. I think the dollar strength has come to an end as well. So yes, I do believe the US markets have topped out. And I think they're going to really struggle to make much progress this year. Now, is that a good or a bad thing for our markets? It's probably actually a good thing, medium term. But we obviously have to deal with a lot of news flow around US trade policy, around events in Russia and Ukraine. And so I think the US sort of generates volatility, but medium term is probably going to be good for Asia and emerging markets, but you need to be selective about those.
Hi, Adrian. But also give us a sense that how do you see the fund flow moving into the emerging markets, because of late we have seen some concerns related to the surge in the dollar index that was impacting the flows in the emerging market, and of course the US markets were definitely sucking out the liquidity. But now that the US markets, the outlook is not turning that bullish and there's a lot of uncertainty regarding the tariffs and the implications, do you believe that now is the time to maybe look out to select pockets in the emerging markets?
Absolutely. And I think there's quite a lot of pressure on global funds that really, to be a successful global fund the last couple of years, you basically wanted to be a US fund with some token global exposure. Now you've got both Europe and certain parts of EM doing well. But, really when you analyze that, it's the ironic parts of EM that are doing well, in that it's China and Mexico. So these countries both have relatively domestic equity markets. And so I think the logic behind what's going on there is that there'll be more support for the domestic economy to offset some of the negative impacts on the external sector. So the market composition is very important. Also, China has got the benefit of the AI story. And I think this whole technology that DeepSeek has come up with is very, very significant. Gautam was talking about, how much power was going to be used in data sensors. If you follow the model that you have with ChatGPT, the model that sort of NVIDIA's processors enable, it's really very difficult to put that in place in an economic way because you burn too much electricity and use too many expensive processors. DeepSeek's technology looks like a game changer. I think you've also had other technology stories out of China this week, BYD talking about their latest vehicle just taking 5 minutes to charge. And so what we've got is a tech story in China plus a bit of domestic demand. And I think that's waking up global investors. I'm noticing a few global funds that I follow beginning to add back some China stocks. So I think it comes back to this sort of selective story in EM. Maybe there's a story in Mexico, maybe at the moment there's a story in China. Elsewhere in emerging Asia, if we look at the big markets, Korea and Taiwan are really too correlated to NASDAQ to do well. And in the ASEAN region, there really is a lack of catalysts. If anything, there's some sort of negative policy in Indonesia. I think the story for India is a little bit more complicated. Obviously, the market has sold off. It sold off because people were disappointed with the level of revenue and EPS growth that was being delivered in an expensive market. There's perhaps less confidence on the growth story in India, but valuations have adjusted down. I would note that at the index level, after failing to sort of break through some of the shorter term moving averages, we're around the 50-day moving average. Let's see if the market can break above that and hold. But at the moment, my focus in EM is very narrow. It tends to be, very much a China focus because that's where we've got, the growth story. I would note that one of the biggest stocks in the MSCI China Index, Tencent, came out with numbers that were ahead of expectation and good forward guidance. Now we're seeing a little bit of profit taking today, but if you've got momentum, relatively inexpensive valuations and positive earnings revisions, that's a good story for equities.
Absolutely, Adrian. I mean, I get it. A lot of, Indian retail as well as, bigger participants as well have been deploying money into China, and not now, since pretty much last year. But, the problem is that it's still being looked at a very much tactical play. Do you think China, with all the news around AI, has become a structural story?
Yeah, I think there's, tactical, structural. One of the problems with the Chinese market is it's pretty volatile. So to some extent, one needs to be reasonably nimble. But yes, I think there is a much more attractive structural story here. So we got a story where the index composition is quite heavy, as it is in the United States, in terms of your tech AI play. And China's coming out with some very interesting technology, and you can play that in very large cap liquid names. So that to me is a structurally interesting story that I want to participate in.
Right, very interesting actually take coming in on that particular front. But thank you so much, Adrian, for making time out. In fact, talking about where actually the value lies at this point in time, especially when you talk about the emerging market. And you did mention the fact that why you have investors not too happy about Indian markets, and you are looking at China. Thank you so much for being part of the show and joining us right now.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.